Good morning. I'm Brenda Manuel, NASA's Associate Administrator for Diversity and Equal Opportunity. Please rise for the colors and the singing of our national anthem.
Hot, 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 hot. Colors! Go! All right, ready, and...
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
All right, forward, Ours turn, horse. Hot, 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 hot.
Thank you, Omega, and thanks to our color guard. You may be seated. I'd like to welcome you to NASA's commemoration of the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. Over the last 50 years, we as a nation have traveled light years in the struggle for racial equality. We have also seen rights expanded for so many other groups in our society that have experienced discrimination. It was the Civil Rights Act that set us on this path. Our program this morning is about paying tribute to the law and its tremendous impact on people of our nation. We would like to begin with a reading from the world-renowned poet, Nikki Giovanni. Over the past 30 years, as a poet, commentator, activist, and educator, Nikki Giovanni has established herself as a strong voice of the Black community. Always insisting on presenting the truth as she sees it, she continues to challenge us to move beyond the divisions of the past to focus on our common humanity. She is also a self-professed space nut whose heroes include Nichelle Nichols of Star Trek fame and Mae Jemison, America's first black woman astronaut, who she once interviewed for Essence magazine. In Giovanni's 2002 book, Quilting the Black-Eyed Pea, she expressed her combined interest in human rights and space in a poem that connects NASA's planned human mission to Mars with the Black experience in America. She agreed to tape a reading of the poem for this occasion. At this time, it is my pleasure to present Nikki Giovanni reading We're Going to Mars.
Quilting the Black-Eyed Pea, we're going to Mars. We're going to Mars for the same reason Marco Polo rocketed to China, for the same reason Columbus trimmed his sails on the dream of spices, for the very same reason Shackleton was enchanted with penguins, for the reason we fall in love. It's the only adventure. We're going to Mars because Perry couldn't go to the North Pole without Matthew Henson, because Chicago couldn't be a city without Jean-Baptiste de Sable, because George Washington Carver and his peanut were the right partners for Booker T. It's a life-seeking thing. We're going to Mars because whatever is wrong with us will not get right with us. So we carry forth, journeying with the same baggage, but every now and then leaving one little bitty thing behind. Maybe drop torturing hunchbacks here, maybe drop lynching Billy Budd there, maybe not whipping Uncle Tom to death, maybe resisting global war, one day looking for prejudice to slip, one day looking for hatred to tumble by the wayside, one day maybe the whole community will no longer be vested in who sleeps with whom. Maybe one day the Jewish community will be at rest, the Christian community will be content, the Muslim community will be at peace, and all the rest of us will get a great meal at holy days and learn new songs and sing in harmony. We're going to Mars because it gives us a reason to change. If Mars came here, it would be ugly. Nations would band together to hunt down and kill Martians. And being the stupid, undeserving life forms that we are, we would also hunt down and kill what would be termed Martian sympathizers, as if the fugitive slave law wasn't bad enough then, as if the so-called war on terrorism isn't pitiful now. When do we learn, and what does it take to teach us? Things cannot be what we want, when we want, as we want. Other people have ideas and inputs, and why won't they leave Rap Brown alone? The future is ours to take. We're going to Mars because we have the hardware to do it. We have the rockets and the fuel and the money and the stuff. And the only reason NASA is holding back is they don't know what to send out and what they will get back. So let me slow this down. Mars is 1 year of travel to get there, plus 1 year of living on Mars, plus 1 year to return to Earth equals 3 years of Earthlings, being in a tight space, going to an unknown place with an unsure welcome awaiting them. Harsh conditions, unknown and unusual foods, and no known landmarks to keep them human. Only a hope and a prayer that they will be shadowed beneath a benign hand. And there is no historical precedent for that except this. The trip to Mars can only be understood through Black Americans, I say. The trip to Mars can only be understood through Black Americans. The people who were captured and enslaved immediately recognized the men who chained and whipped them and herded them into ships so tightly packed there was no room to turn, no privacy to respect, no tears to fall without landing on another. We're not kind and gentle and concerned for the state of their souls, no. The men with whips and chains were understood to be killers, feared to be cannibals, known to be sexual predators. The captured knew they were in trouble, in an unknown place without communicable abilities, with a violent and capricious species. But they could look out and still see signs of home. They could still smell the sweetness in the air. They could see the clouds floating above the land they loved. But there reached a point where the captured could not only not look back, they had no idea which way back might be. There was nothing in the middle of the deep blue water to indicate which way home might be. And it was that moment when a decision had to be made. Do they continue forward with a resolve to see this thing through, or do they embrace the waters and find another world? In the belly of the ship a moan was heard, and someone picked up that moan, and a song was raised, and that song would offer comfort and hope and tell the story. When we go to Mars, it's the same thing. It's middle passage. When the rocket red glares, the astronauts will be able to see themselves pull away from Earth. As the ship goes deeper, they will see a sparkle of blue. And then one day, not only will they not see Earth, They won't know which way to look. And that is why NASA needs to call Black America. They need to ask us, how did you calm your fears? How were you able to decide you were human, even when everything said you were not? How did you find the comfort in the face of the improbable to make the world you came to your world? How was your soul able to look back and wonder? And we will tell them what to do. To successfully go to Mars and back, you will need a song. Take some Billie Holiday for the sad days and some Charlie Parker for the happy ones, but always keep at least one good spiritual for comfort. You will need a slice or two of meatloaf, and if you can manage it, some fried chicken in a shoebox with a nice, moist lemon pound cake. A bottle of beer, because no one should go that far without a beer. And maybe a six-pack, so that if there is life on Mars, you can share. Popcorn for the celebration when you land while you wait on your land legs to kick in. And as you climb down the ladder from your spaceship to the Martian surface, look to your left, and there you'll see a smiling community quilting a black-eyed pea, watching you descend.
We want to thank Ms. Giovanni for the reading of her thought-provoking poem. At this time, I would like to bring to the podium a person who embodies the progress we have achieved since the passage of the Civil Rights Act. A native of Columbia, South Carolina, he grew up at a time when segregation was the norm. In 1980, he joined NASA's astronaut corps and was among the first wave of American Black astronauts. In 2009, he became the first African-American administrator of NASA. In addition to his many years with NASA, he spent 34 years as a United States Marine, retiring as a Major General in 2003. His commitment to service, diversity, excellence, and inclusion runs deep. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you and introduce to others the Administrator of NASA, none other than Charles Bolden.
Thank you so very much, Brenda, and thanks to all of you for coming today, both those of you here and those of you who are viewing. And I know there will be plenty of thanks later, but I owe a great debt of gratitude to the members of the panel who agreed to come out, and especially to Suzanne Malveaux for taking her time to do this. Thanks to all of you for joining us on this occasion. I want to begin my remarks by thanking the teams of the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity, the Office of Communications, and the Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs for organizing this important celebration. Nothing is more critical to our missions and our success than our people of all races and walks of life who come together every day at our centers across the country to make it all happen. Thank you for being such good stewards of our commitment to diversity and inclusion. I also want to recognize and thank the members of Congress and other distinguished panelists who are with us today. At this time, I want to recognize any current or former NASA EEO employees and contractors, especially Dr. Harriet Jenkins, who is here as a member of the panel. Harriet served as NASA's Assistant Administrator for Equal Opportunity Programs from 1974 to 1992, and mentored me, believe it or not, and helped recruit some of the agency's first Black astronauts. Would all of you please stand? Dr. King reminded us that progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It takes hard work and dedicated foot soldiers to bring it about. These men and women are NASA's civil rights foot soldiers, and we owe them all a huge debt of gratitude. NASA's civil rights journey is very much a part of the American struggle for equal opportunity and inclusion. Many of the members of our NASA family faced and overcame tremendous obstacles during the height of the civil rights movement. I learned something this weekend. I'm a big fan of I'm a TV junkie. My wife Jackie and I watch CNN and MSNBC, and occasionally I'll run through Fox. I think most of you know that. But I was listening to Fareed Zakaria yesterday. He has a program called GPS, and I learned something I did not know. And so I'm going to take it on good account that this is accurate. But at the time when President Johnson was trying to get the civil rights law passed, the bill was stuck in the House of Representatives. Congressman Charles Halleck, Republican of Indiana, was fully committed to sit on the bill and not put it on the floor for a vote. President Johnson knew that Halleck wanted NASA funding for research to go to Purdue University, which was in his district. Johnson called Halleck to the White House. While Halleck was in the Oval Office, the president called James Webb. Yeah, the same James Webb who, as NASA administrator, talked to John Kennedy. And I always advise people to go to the website of the Kennedy Library. It is incredible to listen to the audio of the argument between President Kennedy and James Webb about where NASA should take this nation when the decision was made to go to the moon. But the following conversation ensued, and I quote, "I'm sending Charlie Halleck over, and if he's not satisfied and he comes back to me, I'm gonna call you again," unquote. Halleck was apparently satisfied by what Webb had to offer, and the bill was sent to the floor where it passed. Did you know that? I sure didn't. Having said that, you know, as you will see and hear in this video we're about to play, and it was prepared by traveling all over the nation to our various NASA websites. Some of the folk that I mentioned, some of our own fellow NASA employees, can testify to the changes that have taken place since the passage of the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. So let's go ahead and roll that.
All members of the public should have an equal chance to vote for public officials and to send their children to good public schools and to contribute their talents to the public good.
I am NASA.
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 I am NASA. I am NASA.
I am the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
I started here at JPL, NASA in 1989, January of 1989. So I've been here about 25 years now.
I began working for NASA at Johnson Space Center in 1969.
I first came to NASA in the summer of 1980 when I was selected in the second group of Space Shuttle astronauts.
I started working at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in 1964.
I started working for NASA here at the John F. Kennedy Space Center in September of 1973.
I started working for NASA at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas in 1981.
I've had numerous jobs and numerous activities that I've supported in the last 25 years or so. I began as a thermal analyst, looking at going to Mars back in 1990.
Working at NASA has kind of always been a dream of mine. I study distant galaxies using the Hubble Space Telescope, and so to be able to go to Goddard and work there at Goddard, not only in studying astronomy, but also in working on the James Webb Space Telescope has been really great.
When I came to KSC, there were very few African-American employees of any sort. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was rather new on the horizon, of course. As with any new legislation, there was some resistance to it.
When I first started, you have to realize that was when the Civil Rights Act was first enacted, and things were different during those times. Like in the 60s, things were much different.
At that time, minorities, particularly African Americans, were the ones that were included in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was later amended to include other minority groups, Asians, Hispanic Americans, and women.
There was quite a jump in the number of women in the professional areas around 1965. NASA, well, was part of the women's movement generally, and NASA made a determined effort to bring in more women professionals.
When I started working for NASA, I was the only engineer in our division that was female, one of the few blacks, and it was really funny because the fellows didn't quite know exactly what to do with the one woman in the group.
I started off in electrical engineering, moved into mechanical engineering, unknowing that I was a minority at the time. I guess I didn't discover that until I started working here at Glenn Research Center, that being a Native American woman engineer was a minority.
Discrimination is where a person is ostracized, marginalized, or just is not treated fairly.
The common theme is they're treated differently because of reasons beyond their control.
The focus initially was on African Americans. There were very few African Americans at KSC at the time, and those who were here were concentrated in clerical positions and administrative positions. There were very few engineers.
Everything's changed. I mean, American culture has changed and NASA culture has changed. It's funny when you see those movies about Apollo 13 and you see a bunch of white guys in white shirts smoking cigarettes sitting in the control room.
From the time that I first knew about NASA, it has changed exceptionally dramatically, because when I first learned about NASA in the days of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, it was almost all white. At least that's the only part of NASA that anybody saw.
I believe that there was a time when people of color or ethnic diversity were not believed to have the leadership skills, believed to not be intelligent enough or organized enough to do those things.
There was resistance because there had been no African Americans in the space program, and of course they weren't greeted openly. They were perceived as a necessary evil in order to comply with the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
So I had a few strokes against me here. I was too young to be a principal investigator, I was too brown to be a principal investigator, and I was way too female to be a principal investigator. Well, I figured the age thing would go away with time, and it sort of did. But I'm still a woman, and I'm still a brown woman, black woman. At first, I was sort of a curiosity. People would invite me to parties. Look, we have one, you know, that sort of thing. But there were people who were genuinely sure that I didn't belong there, that I didn't deserve to be there. So I kind of made it my duty to prove that I did deserve to be there by doing good work.
You know, there's really three pieces to change. The first one, of course, is legal. There have been a lot of legal changes. The Civil Rights Act, again, 50 years ago, was a key one. The second is diversity, which is having a very diverse workforce that represents the diversity that's in America. And we've changed a lot in that sense. I mean, in the 1960s, we were mostly white males. Now we're a much more diverse workforce. However, there's still changes that need to be made in the third area, which is inclusion. We're beginning to be more inclusive, but we have a lot more work to do in that area.
Gender equality is a big issue, and equal pay and all the complex issues that go along with it. Those are difficult issues, but NASA is really good at doing difficult things.
When we talk about things like diversity and discrimination and things like that, I think that sometimes we lose sight of the bigger picture, that we're all in this together.
Who are we to judge other people? We should humble ourselves, understand each other, and try to come to a common ground and respect our differences and build on our commonality. And that's what really will make us as a whole, as a better community, a better society, and a better nation, of course.
When you start to create, you want to have those multiple perspectives to give the concept, to give the idea, to give the program you're working on a wide variety of looks so that it can have its best chance of being successful.
Women make up half the population, and they're certainly as intelligent as men, so why shouldn't they be half the working force?
But I still believe in NASA. And whenever I have a student in my lab, they leave believing in NASA too.
NASA is a wonderful example of civil rights in action. At Goddard Space Flight Center, we have advisory councils for every organization or every group of people that is discriminated against.
NASA has done things right.
The way NASA has approached this has been really good so far, and I'm excited to see the future, to see more women kind of coming up into employment at NASA and coming up through the fellowship programs and just working their way up.
It's not unnoticed that we've now had several center directors who have been women. We have had African American center directors. So the diversity in the senior leadership in the agency, I'm here, speaks loads to the way that NASA in many ways has led other organizations.
I grew up in Alabama where we had separate but unequal.
I don't think those students and those civil rights leaders and those activists, if they were to look now, fast forward, some of them who didn't get to see the fruits of their labor.
Civil rights is for all of us and not just one set of us. So I think in order to have a sense of fairness, it's important that we all recognize that regardless of color or creed, religion, and others, we have an obligation to support the Civil Rights Acts of 1964.
We are senior research scientists.
We are mechanical engineers.
We are administrators.
We are the engineers of NASA.
We are human capital experts.
We are researchers.
We are astronomers.
We are center directors.
We are scientists.
We are mathematicians.
We are astronauts.
We are
NASA.
We are NASA.
NASA.
Thanks to all of you, and especially thanks to the communications team for putting that video together. What these stories tell us is that we've indeed come a long way since the darkest days of racial division in America. Before the passage of the Civil Rights Act, which was originally proposed by President John F. Kennedy before his 1963 assassination, some of us couldn't eat at the same restaurants as whites. Some of us were forced to go to segregated schools and movies. Some of us were denied the right to vote. Some of us could not even apply for the same jobs as whites. As Lyndon Johnson said on July 2nd, 1964, upon signing the law that would change the course of history, and I quote, "We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment. We believe that all men have certain unalienable rights, yet many Americans do not enjoy those rights. We believe that all men have entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin," unquote. Today, America is a very different place, and so is NASA. There's more opportunity, more diversity, and more hope for the future because of the struggles and sacrifices of people like John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Martin Luther King Jr., and so many other foot soldiers in the civil rights movement. Today, you will hear from some of the former leaders of that movement, some of the people who have benefited from their sacrifices, and some of our leaders in Congress who are protecting that progress and continuing to expand the circle of inclusion and opportunity. But before we get going, many of you may have been watching a series on CNN entitled "The 60s, the Decade That Shaped America." Through archival footage and expert analysis, CNN takes us back to a time that was one of the most tumultuous and most promising in American history. Thanks to today's MC, CNN Suzanne Malveaux, we can all share a brief look at the 60s.
All people should obey just laws, but I would also say that an unjust law is no law at all.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
America is not living into the dream with liberty and justice for all.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue.
We're willing to be beaten for democracy. They'd give anything in the world if we had trouble here.
Would you be willing to go on a demonstration again?
Yes, sir. We want our freedom, and we want it now.
Open hostility towards the civil rights demonstrators.
This is the wrong way.
Moderated by CNN award-winning journalist Suzanne Malveaux. Suzanne serves as the network's national correspondent, covering politics, national news, international events, and culture. Previously, she co-anchored CNN's Around the World and co-anchored the network's Emmy-winning coverage of the revolution in Egypt and the network's Peabody Award-winning coverage of the Arab Spring. Ms. Malveaux was also a White House correspondent for more than 10 years, covering Presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, traveling to Europe, Africa, the Balkans, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Australia, and the Middle East. She has interviewed all 5 living presidents. Suzanne, quit looking up here like that. And several first ladies. She was recently recognized by Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism for covering one of the top 50 stories of the century, for her reporting on then Senator Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. During that time, Ms. Malveaux reported and crafted a 90-minute documentary on Senator Obama and served as a panelist questioning the candidates in the Democratic presidential primary debate in Charlotte, North Carolina in January 2008, and the Democratic presidential debate in Las Vegas in November of 2007. She also played a key role in CNN's 2004 election coverage, as well as its Emmy-winning coverage in 2006. She covered the 2012 Democratic National Convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, and President Obama's second inauguration in Washington, D.C. in 2013. Ms. Malveaux earned a bachelor's degree from Harvard University and a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure and honor to bring to the podium Suzanne Malveaux.
All right, we got it? All right, great. Thank you very much. Charlie, thank you. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here. And of course, we're discussing today the historic Civil Rights Act of 1964. We're going to talk about it, its complexity. We're going to talk about it historically and personally as well with this very esteemed group of panelists here. We're going to reflect on that. And of course, we're also going to be taking some questions from the audience, so you guys can jump in. We'll have mics, so you can participate as well after the Q&A. And we've got social media involved. Twitter, I think the hashtag is AskNASA. And so we'll actually be able to hear and get questions from those around the country about the Civil Rights Act and how it's been impactful. I want to introduce our panelists, and then we'll also kind of open it up and talk about some of those things that are most important to you, as well as our panelists. Just an amazing group that we have here this morning. I want to start off with Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, U.S. Representative, the 30th District of Texas. And of course, just an amazing presence here from a historical and personal perspective, Dr. Harriet Jenkins, former Assistant Administrator for Equal Opportunity Programs at NASA. Dr. Roger Lanius, Associate Director of Collections and Curatorial Affairs at the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum. Thank you. And one of my personal favorites and friends, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, noted author, academic, and radio host. So I want to kick this off really with a personal story on a personal note. Obviously, I'm the product of the civil rights movement, the beneficiary of the civil rights movement. I grew up and my parents told me many stories as a little girl growing up in the segregated South, how they were denied access. They sat in the back of the bus, they went to the colored fountains, water fountains, and were denied the ability to go to the school, to the church, to the swimming pool in their neighborhoods. Fast forward to Charlie Bolden. This was July 2011, and he invited me to see the space launch, the shuttle launch. So you had Charlie Bolden, NASA administrator, African American. I sat beside and interviewed Mae Jemison, black astronaut, historic, under an administration of a black president, Barack Obama. I mean, in my lifetime, some people would ask, were we on another planet? Nikki Giovanni would have said, maybe it was Mars. I mean, that is how far we've come in my parents' lifetime and in my lifetime. So I'd like to ask the panelists, but the first question, give us a story, a recollection. What was it about the civil rights movement, a defining moment, if you would, that stood out in your mind and perhaps changed your life and even the lives of others in the country? Congressman, I'll start with you.
Well, what I can immediately recall is the assassination of President Kennedy in my hometown of Dallas, Texas. I was an adult, a young adult, working as a nurse. I was quite aware, what you say your parents told you, I lived it. I'm old enough to remember before the Civil Rights Act. And I've seen the struggle of trying to reach equality since the Civil Rights Act. But I'll be eternally grateful to President Kennedy and President Johnson for working with Martin Luther King and the leaders of at that time to make sure that it was achieved. But I realized as a young nurse on a psychiatric ward at the Veterans Administration Hospital that we had a president that had just been assassinated because he was standing up for equal rights. And that's the way it was interpreted by me and people that I knew all over the neighborhood. That was very defining. I realized at that moment that if he gave his life for making sure that I had a chance, then I would be willing to give the rest of my life trying to make sure that other young people and women would have a chance. And that's been pretty much my life since then. I had to leave my home state of Texas to go to a nursing school that was nationally accredited. I could not be admitted to a college anywhere in Texas that had a nationally accredited nursing program. All of that came to my mind at that time. And I don't know anyone. I had a young son who is now celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary and 3 adult sons. That was so small that he was consoling me at 4 years old, saying, "Mother, but he's not dead. There he is on television." I said, "He's dead, but his spirit is not." That was a defining moment for me.
Thank you. Dr. Jenkins.
I'm not certain that I can think of the defining moment, but I can recall over my long life that I certainly got a shock when I applied to the Berkeley Unified School District and wanted to work there. I had a master's, well, I had a degree with a major in mathematics, and they told me that they did not place black teachers in their secondary schools. And that I went back and took a lot of education at the University of California, got my elementary credentials, and then got a job in Berkeley and went up the ranks. And it was in the Berkeley Unified School District, and that city, that was actually more advanced thinking and looked at human beings that integrated its school system. And we did it through a very educational process of deliberating and working with the citizens in the community, with the teachers, with the parents, to make that a process over a series of years. And I wanted to mention that we actually have one of the stars of that process in Berkeley, California, sitting here, Richard Hunter, who has gone on to be not only teacher and educator and several superintendencies in Dayton, Ohio, Seattle, Washington, Baltimore, Maryland, and other places, and a professor on university campuses. And so I say, oh, there's a product of the Berkeley
You want to
Unified
stand here?
School
You want to
District.
be acknowledged here for a moment? Thank you.
I'm going to stop for a while.
It's okay. We have plenty of time.
Okay,
Dr.
I
Lonnie,
understand.
go ahead.
Well, as a white man, I have not personally experienced this type of racism that's been present in our society. And it's still present. There's no question about that. But as a historian, I can speak to some of the issues associated with this in the context of NASA. NASA has had a mixed record when it comes to race relations. There's no question about that as well. But there are a couple of really important, I think, success stories that I would mention to you from the 1960s. The first one was in the fall of 1964, just after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. NASA went to Southern University, and some of you may be familiar with that school in Baton Rouge, and hired a number of co-op students. And those of you at NASA know what the co-op program is all about. Young engineering students who moved to Marshall Space Flight Center, 7 of whom were the initial group. There was a few that joined them shortly thereafter, and they became a part of that program. Many of them stayed there for their entire career. In the heart of Alabama, at the time of the Civil Rights Crusade, as it was taking place in horrible ways in places like Selma and Birmingham. And they made their point about how they could do all of the same work that anybody else at the center was doing. They were a part of the engineering team that was there, and as I said, many of them throughout their entire careers. That was a step forward in a couple of ways. The agency itself stepped up to the plate and said, okay, this is a part of the law. We are going to try to make it a part of what we do at NASA, and recruited these individuals. And they showed the courage to go forth and to work there and to do their jobs in a hostile environment, to be perfectly honest. That's something to be said for both the agency and for the individuals involved.
All right, thank you. Dr. Dyson.
Well, I was born in '58. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the year NASA was born, so we're born together.
Twins.
Twins. Yeah, I've often been called a space cadet, but I'm not. But I was very much interested as a youth in Detroit, Michigan, in Goddard and Wernher von Braun. I used to read all his biographies, but not because I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a theoretical physicist. I met mathematics. I became a minister. So.
How'd that work out for you?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I hate to live that stereotype up. So, for me, the memory of the civil rights movement came when Dr. King was murdered. I was 9 years old in Detroit, Michigan, and I was sitting in the living room watching television, my father in his favorite chair, and right after 6, the newscaster announced that Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot in Memphis, Tennessee. And my father gave out an involuntary guttural ejaculation. It was deep and painful and grievous all at once. And so I started paying attention, like, who is this man? And my mother pointed him out, and then they had that famous last speech he gave, and I was riveted, really. And so the next day I sent off for a little a recording of Dr. King. It was in a small 45. I know young people don't know what a 45 is besides the caliber of a gun. And I had a little record player, and I got all of those speeches, and I had excerpts of Dr. King in Chicago. If you want us to end our moves into communities, open these communities. I heard him in I Have a Dream speech. And then I heard that last speech he gave, arguably the greatest speech of his life, the night before he was murdered. And he gave a tour of history off the cuff that was remarkable. And so that began my journey along with the summer before the riots of '67. And those two forces were the twin engines of my own being yanked from the cocoon of innocence racially and thrust into the real world of racial struggle. And so Dr. King's life became a template for me of understanding how race evolved in America. He's not the only figure. We focus on Dr. King because he was such a majestic and magnetic, magical and charismatic figure, but there were a battalion of people, a contingent of workers, a lot of underpaid black women who were struggling. And as I began to study and do more formal scholarship, I began to study that movement. I have since written 2 books on Dr. King, and he remains such a powerful figure because he was a metaphor for what happens when America sends its best against its worst, and the negotiations and struggles. And I end by saying, you know, when we talk about the Civil Rights Bill, you know, I see the women featured there. You know, there's so many interesting facets. We not only have General Bolden now as head of NASA, but the fact is women being included in the provisions that were protected was a last-minute effort to really derail the bill. They figured, well, we throw some women in there, ain't nobody gonna really vote for it. And then the women got to hook up on the humble. So, to put it theoretically acutely. So what's interesting, of course, is that when people start talking about who owns the bill, right, and who owns civil rights, and people get mad because gay people get involved, like, hey, it's our stuff, because black people own so few things, so we figure we got to have a copyright on the civil rights. But at the same time, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. is borrowing from a brown saint in India. It's already international. It's already sweetly promiscuous because you borrow from different sources, so nobody can own it. So gay and lesbian, transgender and bisexual people should be able to appropriate that bill as well. And now we have a president who was forced into acknowledging gay marriage by the voice of God named Joe Biden. So it was right here. That was Jesus. And so now we see it coming full circle, and it's really fascinating to see how political struggles duplicate the struggles in the street and then at least parallel them and sometimes contradict them, but without each operating, we wouldn't have the kind of progress we have today.
So I want to pick up on that point, actually, because it's one of the questions, and a lot of people are asking about this. What is the next civil rights issue, if you will? Because I recently talked to Congressman John Lewis, who said he believed it was immigration rights. And then Andrew Young has said he believes that the women's rights, women's struggle is still very important. And NAACP has mentioned what you talked about, which was gay rights. Anybody on the panel here, tell us what you think might be the next civil rights issue that's paramount. Congresswoman, I'll start with you.
Well, I think equal quality education for all of our children is the major issue, because education will help us to overcome many of the barriers that color has put in our way. And we are becoming more of a brown society. It's not white or black. We have more immigrants that are integral parts of this society, and all of us must have an opportunity. We must make an opportunity for every young person on this planet and especially in the United States, to get a quality education.
And I would hope that that education does not continue to push our young black youth to prison. We really have got to stop that process of poor education, undereducation, and then sending them into prison.
Do you think, Dr. Jenkins, do you think it's education that's the next civil rights issue that's most important, or do you think it's linked to a particular group?
Well, no, education is always important. And we ought to make certain that we learn how to ensure that all youngsters, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of the color of their skin or their sex, can get a good education and stop treating youngsters, even in their youth, poorly in classrooms and starting this issue of they do not obey certain rules, or they are made to go stand in corners, or they are disciplined in inappropriate or inequitable ways. And we have to really, really, really stop that. And we've got to stop the police department from arresting people that unfairly, and also putting our youth in prisons and then continuing those lives of prison.
Thank you. Dr. Lonis?
Well, obviously, all of these are important. LGBT is going to be one of the major issues. It already is. The same is true with immigration and a variety of other things. But I think it's important that we keep in mind that that civil rights is not resolved for African Americans or anyone else, and there are concerted efforts to roll back opportunities that we have to be diligent about trying to respond to. Whether that requires activism in the sense of crusades and such, like we saw in the 1960s, or legal challenges, or whatever else it is, that is a fundamental task of the first part of the 21st century, I believe, is that the gains we have seen in 50 years are not somehow lost in this process.
So I want to follow up on that point, and Michael, perhaps you can address this. So what is the biggest threat, do you think, then to the progress that the country has made regarding civil rights?
Well, they're deeply entrenched beliefs, habits, dispositions, and outlooks, perspectives of people in power and authority, right? We see this a bit with the sheriff who was fired recently or resigned under pressure after calling Obama the N-word. And he said, yeah, I did it because he met and exceeded my definition as such. Very clear articulation. The Cliven Bundy situation and so on. Though Attorney General Eric Holder, an equally significant moment in the development and evolution of race in this country, having an Attorney General, right, the lawgiver, so to speak, being a person of color makes a huge difference, because the struggle over civil rights now is much more sophisticated and much more subtle, and people hide behind different reasons. You know, urban education, black and brown students. When it comes to the prison pipeline from schools, detention, black kids are expelled at higher rates. Black kids are put out of school for longer time periods. They are sent more readily to detention as opposed to police people calling up the parents, as they do with majority culture kids, and avoiding the kind of stigma that comes from being jailed. All that stuff has to be addressed. What Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, which is the disproportionate concentration of black and brown people in prison, because it really affects what kind of jobs you can get, whether you can vote and the like. So all that is real, but I think we have to also confront the fact that there was a critical decision between identity politics, which are extremely important, respecting Black history. Black History Month comes, look at the great contributions of black people, versus the legal and the policy-driven politics that say, whether you acknowledge my history or not, treat me fairly and equally. And I think that was that's something that we have yet to grapple with. And the irony is, as I end, you know, we have a black president in office who really can't even talk about race. Right? Now, I ain't saying whether he wants to or not, that's a different argument. The question is, why isn't it that the first African-American president free enough to address race in a way that Bill Clinton has more privilege to be black in public than Barack Obama? Barack Obama can't play no saxophone on Arsenio's now canceled show, right? Wow, what happened to that, bro? So I love you, man. So the thing is that he has more permission to behave a certain way as a white man in public as black than Barack Obama, but at the same time, Barack Obama has benefited from some extraordinary struggles that he has failed to acknowledge and to articulate in a certain way because of the limits of the public that doesn't want to deal with race and politicians who have obstructed him. Those kind of issues have to be dealt with, and it's ugly. We don't want to really talk about it. Are you suggesting that senators and Congress people are embracing an ideology that is predicated upon a certain bigoted view? Well, of course. But the point is, of course, yeah. But at the same time, it's not about finger pointing. Hey, you're more bigoted than this next person, because all of us have bigotry. That's why we have to relate the civil rights movement for race and equality to those who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Why? Because you really know it's a civil rights issue when people who are used to be dissed now turn to their religion to diss other people. See? So now, well, it's an exception. Now you got to apologize to the white bigots you used to be mad at when you now, based upon your religion, want to not extend the same rights to gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual people. What's the difference? They said God told them black people should be subservient. Now we're saying God tells us that gay and lesbian and transgender bisexual people should be subservient. Now you see the similarity of opinion and perspective. That's why diversity can never work. Diversity is not equality. Diversity could mean we have an African American, a Latino, and an Asian person who agree that gay people should be put back. So you have diversity without equality. The real question about civil rights and social struggle is about true and radical equality that extends those measures to all human beings, regardless of who they are.
Yes.
Thank you. I want Dr. Jenkins to weigh in on this because Michael was talking about the fact that it is difficult to talk about race, to deal with these issues. From your perspective, I mean, you were here at NASA for a long time. Is it more difficult now? Is it more closed now to discuss these things that people don't want to discuss openly than it was when you were at NASA? Or do you see some real sea change here? Where are we going?
I saw a fantastic sea change. First of all, I was going to say amen to this presentation.
You can say amen.
And this set of pictures that the administrator of NASA showed just made me so proud. And when all of those persons from the various occupations in our various centers talked about themselves, gave their own testimony. And I thought I couldn't be prouder, and I wish that so many of my staff who worked so hard all of those years, and other EO staffs at our NASA centers could have seen that. And a number of them are not with us any longer. Some of you may remember Osceola Hall, who was one of our division directors in the Equal Opportunity Office, managed the discrimination complaints all of those years, including the class complaint that was brought by employees here. And I lost Alfonso Ludi, who had our internal affairs. Dear Brenda Manuel was on Osceola's staff, managing all the allegations of discrimination within the agency, and she's now head of the office, and that's very, very good. And so when I think about the things that we were doing at that time and trying to help the agency do, I feel quite proud. And I don't know whether people realize that what we did was to put the responsibility on the line managers of NASA to understand the nature of the problem, the underrepresentation of minorities and women and disabled individuals, and to take the responsibility for ensuring that they would integrate their staffs and ensure that we could get a much more diverse and representative a set of workers at NASA. And that has occurred, as you saw. You have to be quite proud of that.
All right, thank you. I understand we have social media. We've got somebody. Jason, you want to, who do we have? Do we have a question from Twitter?
We have a question here from a Twitter user named Daniel, who asked, what's being done to get NASA robotic classes into low-income district schools that are predominantly of color?
All right.
Where's the
We're really going to need one of these.
You want to talk about that?
Last time I was teaching that.
All right, let me get Charlie.
I'll give it a try.
Okay.
I think most people know about FIRST Robotics. NASA is a big promoter of FIRST Robotics. I hope that's what Daniel's talking about. We sponsor more than 300 teams across the country, and we are really trying to encourage more federal agencies to likewise get involved. But FIRST Robotics, FIRST Legos, those types of programs are ones that are essential that we get into the schools of the U.S. And our education department, our science mission directorate is the primary sponsor for FIRST Robotics. So I think we're making an effort to do it, but we just can't reach all of the schools. And that's one of the reasons we've tried to reach out to other federal agencies and ask them to become as active as we are. I don't think there's anybody anywhere close to the number of FIRST Robotics teams that we sponsor across the nation.
And Charlie, if I could just put you on the spot real quick here. Talk a little bit about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and how Civil Rights Act has propelled minorities or folks who are getting involved in STEM and the sciences.
Well, I think, you know, I graduated from C.A. Johnson High School in Columbia, South Carolina in 1964. When I graduated, it was segregated. When the Civil Rights Act was passed, several years later, schools in South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, all across the South were integrated, which gave us an opportunity to get into schools that offered engineering degrees, whereas, you know, at Allen, Benedict, the schools that I knew when I was growing up, South Carolina State didn't even offer engineering curricula. So the Civil Rights Act opened the doors that allowed young people of color to go to schools where they could get the engineering background. We now find that we are encouraging junior colleges, community colleges, as well as historically black colleges and universities to team with other schools that have engineering curriculum. NASA used to have a program called Wise Scholars. I'm very proud to say our daughter, who's now a plastic surgeon here in Washington, D.C., was a Wise Scholar that went to Spelman and studied chemistry for 3 years and then went to Georgia Tech and got an engineering degree. But we've got to do more of that type activity. So it's incumbent upon us to keep doing what we were doing.
All right, thank you. I want to ask Congresswoman, because this is something that comes up a lot here. I mean, you think about the Civil Rights Act, you know, back in the, 64, it was an extraordinary time where Congress, the administration, the country was able to get things done. So you had housing, you had voting, you had civil rights, all within the span of just a couple of years. What do we do now? How do we make things happen? Is it even possible for us to turn to members of Congress, to the administration, and say, you know what, this is what we need to get done? Are we in a place where we can make significant change from the government?
You know, as you were asking that question, I had 1,000 thoughts go through my mind and trying to figure out how I can say this without being so discouraging. But being a part of Congress right now, the whole focus with a large faction of people is against the president, no matter what he stands for. Even if it's going to make their districts the best district in the world, if he comes up with the idea, there's something wrong with it. And it's very difficult because it's causing us to be very divided. It is dividing the country. And so, and to a large degree, having an African-American president has brought as many problems and perhaps not as many solutions that we all look forward to. We thought that young people would be so encouraged that they would prepare themselves because they knew it was possible to be president. When you looked at how the president is being treated in this country, you wonder what it's doing to all young people of color, not just African Americans. And we're becoming a society of people of color. We're challenged, and we need the public to speak up and show up and vote up so that we can get on another road, because the way we're going now, we're not going to get much of anything done. It is a very divided Congress. It is divided pretty much by race because we have a black president.
Do you think that because there's also a split in the Republican Party that there are some divisions that go beyond race?
There is a split in the Republican Party. I have dear friends who are Republican that I know that want to do the right thing, but they're threatened as well. You know, if they act as if they might be leaning toward being liberal or leaning toward the center, they get targeted and get defeated. And so even though we have people all over the South that have not necessarily been friends to all Americans, they're getting replaced by people who are worse. And so it's hard to see a bright light in the Congress without the people here all around this country waking up and making sure that there's a difference in what we are sending here to work together. We must work together. And color is not going away. You know, you can be gay or lesbian, that's not going away. They've always been with us, and they always will be. We are becoming more of a society that we have to look for everyone. You know, we're in such a competitive environment in the world that we need to forget about what color people are and what gender and use our talent and focus on our talent. And we've gotten away from that under this particular administration because all of the right-wing people are really focused, some of them are Democrats and most Republicans, focused on the color of the president rather than what we can do and how we must see our future as a nation. Our focus should be preparing our young people to be globally competitive. But we can't get there with what we're working with.
I'm very curious. Thank you. I'm curious if the other panelists agree with that assessment. I mean, Dr. Lenny, see if you want to jump in as well, because it does sound rather dire and dim, and we want to figure out, like, where do we go from here? What do we do?
Well, there are great divides. There's no question about that in the context of the political framework that exists. And some of it is racially motivated, some of it is not, some of it is economically motivated. All of these are difficult issues, and one of the things that has resulted from that is this gridlock that exists in the ways in which Harry Truman referred to the Congress just after World War II as the do-nothing Congress. Well, they were workaholics in comparison to the present Congress in terms of legislation passed, and I'm sure that you would agree. I had great hopes that we might have some immigration reform with this particular Congress, and now it looks like in the aftermath of certain primaries that took place, that's probably not going to happen this term, and that's very unfortunate. I'm very closely tied to a large number of friends and family that are on the border in southern Arizona, and they are wrestling with the issues associated with the Border Patrol, but not especially the Border Patrol, especially with the vigilantes that are present there, and they really are vigilantes, who are seeking to deal with individuals who are crossing the border. Admittedly, they are doing so in a manner that is not cognizant of the larger laws that we have on immigration here. But nonetheless, as undocumented workers, there's a great deal of abuse and obviously deportation, a variety of things like that result from that. And the brutality of that situation is very real and very difficult and needs to be addressed by the nation, and hopefully something will result somewhere down the road, either through executive order or maybe hopefully legislation.
All right, you want to jump in, and then we'll do a quick Twitter.
Yeah, I think that as bleak as it appears, what the Congresswoman is saying, that without her kind of shot of reality, we're not going to confront anything anyway. Because when you look at what happened 50 years ago with the passage of this bill, I mean, John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy have earned in death what they didn't necessarily gain in life, which is that, you know, the book about John F. Kennedy and race is called The Bystander. I don't have to say much more than that. That's the title of the book. It's a thick one. It's about his dealing with race. Now, he, like President Obama, was facing a Congress that wasn't too keen on trying to bring civil rights to the fore. So he had to negotiate in very serious ways, which included allowing Martin Luther King Jr. to be wiretapped. Why? Because the Red Scare was deep. So now anti-communist fervor was at such a high pitch. J. Edgar Hoover was really calling the shots from the FBI because he had dirt on John F. Kennedy, and they didn't want to push him too much, so they allowed him to do some illegal stuff and some immoral stuff. And then when you put in the fact that Lyndon Baines Johnson was a so-called redneck racist from Texas, did more to help black people than any president, I would argue, since Abraham Lincoln. Since Abraham Lincoln. So I say all that to say, part of it means that the president now, Obama, is facing unprecedented opposition. And you're absolutely right. But the Tea Party says, hey, it's not about race or culture with us, it's about the Constitution. Really? How come you weren't mad at George Bush? Because he did more to tamper with the Constitution than Obama ever did in terms of marriage. Then secondly, in terms of swelling the deficits, the dude might as well have been a liberal Democrat in terms of the deficit. So when we look at all of the excuses made, we don't want to tell the truth about race in America because it's too painful to do so. Even the president becomes a poor historian when he retells the story and the narrative of civil rights to adjust it to the forces that prevail now, so he won't look as so much of a radical and a liberal that challenges the status quo. So I think when we talk about it that way, we have to be honest about the situation we confront, and unless we tell the truth about it, we won't be able to move forward in a progressive and I think ultimately in a productive fashion.
All right, I know that there's probably going to be a lot of questions in the audience, and we're also going to go to social media. Jason, you got another Twitter question.
Indeed, this comes from Twitter user Thomas, who asks, I know NASA did a lot with the Civil Rights Act. Is NASA going to be doing anything for equal education?
Yeah, Charlie. You're the best NASA
I'll try to go back
here.
one more time. And in our program, what we're trying to do with other federal agencies, to be quite honest, is we're trying to collaborate and cooperate to find the best of all worlds, to find out which agencies have the best approach to STEM education, for example, without destroying those programs that the individual agencies have in place. When I talk about looking at community colleges, NASA has historically not even considered community colleges, but beginning with Leland, continuing right on with Roosevelt Johnson, who's the acting head of education right now, we have a big focus on trying to get into community colleges and help students there understand the critical importance of establishing the foundations for going on to college and graduate school in STEM-related courses. So that's our effort. But our big focus is actually in the middle school area with something that we have a program called Summer of Innovation, where we try to reach middle school students and middle school teachers, the teachers being the primary piece, because you can reach 1,000 students and you got 1,000 students. If you reach 1,000 teachers, you are going to reach millions of students through the year. So we're trying to give a middle school science and math teacher the courage to stand in front of the students and say, this is fun. You know, we can really do this, instead of running away from it the way we historically have done.
All right, thank you, Charlie. Let's open it up for questions from the audience. I'm sure there are quite a few. Let's go to the left-hand side first. Don't be shy. Right-hand side. There you go.
Thank you for the opportunity to address this august body. I'm really impressed with all of you, and I'm just, well, Tyson, I watch him every chance I get on the media, so.
He's a fighter, too.
Just let me thank all
Dyson.
of you. Dyson, I'm sorry, Dyson. And, well, Tyson, too, I love him, too. But anyway, and all of you. But I want to point out two things that concerns me and was never addressed, and that is the role of the church. It's the biggest organization in the black community as far as I'm concerned. And I can speak from authority because my father, my father's father, and my whole family of men have been ministers. And my brother is now a Pentecostal minister. And I see these huge mega churches with all these people going to church, putting all this money in the church. And yet there are no free tutorial programs for these black children. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who are members of churches sitting in this room. And they can admit to the fact that they go to these churches and they roll out to those ATM machines and put their money in there and support these huge mega churches. And yet, they don't have free tutorials, science education for those children, math, science, all those courses that the kids are suffering in. They just don't have it. Where are you? I challenge the black church. All churches, but particularly the black churches, because that's where we congregate. That's where we get our source of strength. To start opening up those churches, those doors, and give that to the children. Free tutorial education. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you. Go ahead, jump in if you, the role of the church.
Well, this is a small example, but I have an annual workshop with ministers And we do have a number of tutorial programs in churches because the focus is to use the church other than on Wednesdays and Sundays. And there's been quite a bit of activity throughout Dallas. And in addition to that, many of our volunteer professional organizations, and I'll mention one in particular, Links, that's been working with NASA. We have 276 chapters, and all chapters have programs related to tutorial programs as well as exposure and guidance to students in the STEM areas. We have the Links STEM Academy throughout the country. So that's small, and it doesn't touch everybody. But we've got to start small because we're not going to get every church to do everything all at the same time. So we have to continue to spread it. But there are efforts going on.
We have another question from the audience.
Actually, I have one. This is for Representative Johnson and Dr. Dyson. Mass incarceration. CNN, all the major networks, they do documentaries and portray. And when you look at it, it's modern day slavery. But when you hear political platforms, nobody's talking about it. So what do you think, and even today when we talk about the next civil rights issue, we say education. No one talks about mass incarceration. What are your thoughts?
Well, I really think that we did. She mentioned mass incarceration.
As far as our president, as Dr. Dyson said, he can't talk about it, and other political figures.
Well, I think what we're focusing on are the programs that attempt to alleviate the need for incarceration, trying to make sure that students are guided in the right direction. And it's not just the administration, it's not just elected officials, it's the home and the parents and those communities that we used to call a village that's got to be involved in helping to guide young people from the time that they're born. We got a lot of focus now on preschool education and early education. I think all of that is important. But, you know, young people are not going to have opportunities without a good basic education. And so that's why I'm thinking that a very broad common thread, no matter what income group, no matter how low it is or how high it is, you cannot go wrong in investing in education. It is clear that poverty in this country has more to do with the lack of achievement, obviously, than many other things. We are trying to deal with poverty, but that's not just my job as an elected official. That's everybody's job. I wish I could promise you more than what we're doing. I wish I could promise you some new ideas of what we're implementing. I simply cannot do that. But what I can tell you is that it is on the radar, and we're all trying to work toward it. We're trying to focus a great deal on making sure that opportunities for quality education for all young people is available. We cannot do it as individuals. All we can do is put the mechanisms in place, and the communities and the local governing boards and the parents must determine which way that goes. We're in a crisis in my home city right now because we've had a turnover. We've gone from having a black and white public school system to a minority school district, with 70% of them being Hispanic in the city of Dallas. We've got to deal with that. They're not going home because home is where they are. So everybody needs that opportunity. And it still continues to be a lot of racism that really governs the direction of young people. But I can't change that direction. You and other people in that community must be involved in making demands and being a part of that change.
And we have, yeah, real brief, and then we're going to take another question from the audience.
Okay. Well, when you talk about mass incarceration, Attorney General Holder, to his credit, has tried to address this with the support of the president, because the president was very strong on this issue when he was a state senator, not so much as a U.S. senator, and of course, as president with a broader purview, hasn't paid attention to this in a way, but has permitted and encouraged Eric Holder, who has taken the ball and run with it in terms of, reducing the disparity between crack and powder cocaine sentencing, which resulted in, a lot of black people are locked up and Latino people are locked up for nonviolent drug offenses. So the decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana, because that's why the stop and frisk was so horrible in New York, they didn't commit the crimes they said they committed. Oh, but by the way, you got a roach clip on you. Oh, but by the way, you got some weed on you. Now the person gets introduced into the legal system, into the criminal justice system for no intent, without the intent of doing one crime, but then put there for another. And then secondly, I think that education is critical to this, but we can join the question about the church to here. These churches that we have, these enormously productive and powerful places of both economic, if you will, collection of monies that represent our community's earning power, if we could use those churches in ways to address those prison ministries to address this issue, I think we'd go a lot further. I'm going to Dallas with Dr. Freddie Haynes, who's a very progressive minister, a huge mega church, but they are concerned about a social justice agenda. And one of those social justice agendas has to be the incarceration of our young people, because they get disenfranchised when they can't vote. They have poor jobs when they come out. Many of them have not done heinous crimes. And as a result of that, they get stigmatized. So it is a social issue that is a civil rights issue for the 21st century. And I think it goes along with how do we, but most of our mega churches are talking about theology that has nothing to do with economic redistribution and the concentration of poverty in our neighborhoods. So we have to challenge ourselves in that sense as well.
All right, thank you. We're going to take one last question over here before we wrap it up.
Okay, thank you very much. We know the Civil Rights Act was about an opportunity for others, particularly African Americans. But what I don't hear is what happened afterwards. So we know some of the stories, like the peanut farmer and that bomber escort that allowed those bombers to do their job. I'd like the panel to talk about what happens when you let the African American in, give him a fair and equal opportunity. What happens then?
As a historian, I can say something about that, but maybe I should defer to you.
We'll let you both talk. Go ahead.
Look at what we heard, and you see what happens.
I mean, obviously, the NASA place in the Civil Rights Act and its implementation was significant. NASA has a mixed record, no question about that. But one of the things that did happen was there was hiring that took place at not just kind of administrative or other types of roles that were not professional, but also as engineers and ultimately as scientists. And we see that in the late 1960s. There's still not a large number of those, and when you look at the pictures of mission control from Apollo, you see a bunch of white guys. No question about that. That begins to change very effectively in the 1970s, especially after EEO becomes sort of a norm. And you know, one of the great failings of NASA in the 1960s was that it did not have an African-American astronaut. And that is a failure. There's no other way to describe that. And the people who were in charge of NASA at the time will give you all the reasons why they thought that was the case. But nonetheless, they did not pursue that particular very public sort of statement, which they could have done. But one of the things that did happen, the first astronaut corps that was brought in after Apollo had African American as in the 1978 class, and from thereafter that has been the case. So those are pluses that we can point to. And each of the individuals who came into NASA to engage in science and engineering and becoming an astronaut, they brought with them their background, their training, their strengths, and their weaknesses. But by and large, what we find is that they work very, very hard to be not just effective in their job, but stellar in their job, because they do believe that they are leading a charge. That's very important, and setting an agenda for the future. And there's nothing that is inappropriate about that whatsoever. But I've seen it over and over again with interviews that I've done where they said, I was the only person in my group who was African American or Hispanic or whatever it happened to be. And I felt that it was incumbent on me to be better than everybody else because of that. I think we've seen that story lots of
And,
times.
I want to point out.
Oh, okay, we're running out of time here. If you could give me 10 seconds, and Dr. Jenkins, I'd like you to weigh in as well, because we want to wrap it up with our NASA.
The one thing I want to point out is that it gave an opportunity for African Americans to serve in Congress and serve in other elected positions. And just being a member of Congress as an African American is very different often than others, because we take on every problem there is as it relates to minorities throughout the country. We have to protect people like Mr. Boulder, Administrator Boulder. We have to make sure that people like him get in places. We have to make sure that once we can get the doors open, we got to protect them to stay there. And that's long, that's a bigger picture than working in legislation every day. We have to contact practically every agency to make sure that civil rights become a part of the agenda within those agencies. Academies, the military academies, everything that relates to race, it ends up on our table. And I can tell you this, the Congressional Black Caucus is an integral part of what happens in this nation as relates to race for all people, even in the world. That is more of an agenda sometimes in our legislation. And yet, on the other hand, we don't have a majority numbers, but we impact that legislation so that it does not forget that it's got to be inclusive when it comes through. And I could go on, but I know my time's up.
When they let black people in, look, can you imagine, as Ralph Ellison said, imagine America without black people. No Beyonce, no Jay, that alone should solve the case. But, right, no Jay-Z, no Bell Hooks, no, Nikki Giovanni, intellectuals, artists, no General Bolden. I can't call him Charlie. I know he told me to call him Charlie. That's General. Black people fought too hard for a major general status. I'm calling him General every time I see him. Why? Because without the access provided, he then bears the burden of representation, as the congressman talked about. So all of us, there would be no Suzanne Malveaux. Look at Suzanne Malveaux. What would CNN be without Suzanne Malveaux? Right? We got to think about that.
Thank you. I'll pay you later. I'd like to end it with Dr. Jenkins, if you could, before we move on. If you would, just tell us what you think is the most important thing right now that we need to do individually, collectively, to move forward, to make things better when it comes to the rights of all people.
I'd say each and every single one of us has the responsibility to identify which problems they'd like to help solve. Try to get a group together that can start thinking with you about how you would do that and who should be amongst this effort to try to help you solve those issues. And you want it to be a learning process as well as an intelligent process where you're going to get the information and you're going to decide strategies and you're going to get resources and you're going to look for people who can help you support what it is you're trying to learn and propose as corrective actions. If you can get a group that is active and dedicated and wanting to solve problems and will put together the kind of energy and effort that you want to do, you can then start proposing specific steps to educators, to legislators, to people who run your cities and counties, and bring to them good ideas that help solve the problem. So do it wherever you can, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your church group, whether in your alumni group from your college, or even interested people right in your neighborhood or community who are trying to address an immediate problem. Working together with people is one of the most innovating, creative ways to solve problems for our citizenry.
Thank you. I would like to thank our distinguished panelists. I'd like to bring up NASA's Dr. Robert Lightfoot for closing remarks.
First of all, I want to thank Suzanne for doing such a great job with our panel. I want to thank the panel. This was an outstanding discussion and dialogue, and it's just an honor to hear your perspectives on today's discussion. So let's give them a big hand as well. Thanks to the Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity. I have to read these because I'll miss one. If I don't, I'll get in trouble. The Office of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs, and the Office of Communication for organizing this event and having everybody involved here. So most of you may not know this, but I'm a native of Montevallo, Alabama, right in between Birmingham and Selma, about 30 miles from each. And so I grew up having spent much of my time watching this go on, watching what happened in the 60s with my parents. I also spent most of my career at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville and Stennis Space Center down in Mississippi. So I've seen some progress, seen a lot of progress to the South since the enactment of this the Civil Rights Act in 1964. I have a good friend at Marshall Space Flight Center, Teresa Washington. She's the head of human capital there, one of my favorites. And she was one of my mentors when I was the center director at Marshall. And she would always say, while we're doing good, we're not going to break our arms patting ourselves on the back. We got a long way to go, but we are doing better. And NASA, in my opinion, I'm very proud of the example we continue to set as we involve more people in this country and more people in this world with the important work we do. One of the things that Dr. King and many of the other leaders of the civil rights movement understood that was solving the race problem was simply the tip of the iceberg. As we've seen since the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the movement has expanded to include women, people with disabilities, and many others. And the nonviolent tactics of this movement have been embraced by freedom-loving people around the world. One of the greatest examples and symbols of this expanded view of civil rights, in my opinion, is the International Space Station. Our orbiting research facility, which is has been occupied by people from 15 nations for more than 13 years. The ISS is not only advancing our capabilities and understandings in space, it's the model of cooperation internationally from all walks of life here on Earth. On a personal note, a very personal note, I'm also proud of the fact that I work for a real example of progress in Administrator Charlie Bolden. For me, it's on days like this that I'm reminded he's also African American. Because to me, Charlie is a Naval Academy grad, a pilot in Vietnam, a 2-star Major General Marine, a shuttle commander, a NASA administrator, and probably most importantly for me and several of us on the 9th floor, a mentor and a good friend. That's the example we want. That's the example that we get to set. When somebody asks what happens when you let one in, there he is. So as we leave here today, I ask that you guys embrace NASA's vision, the vision of civil and human rights, as we rededicate ourselves and the agency to reaching those new heights and basically doing everything we can to benefit all humankind. Thank you for being here today, and thanks for everything you guys did as a panel. Let's give them all a big hand one more time.